some booktubers create really meaningful videos. They craft a script. They have really important things to say. That is not the vibe here. I just woke up from a nap, and now we're going to talk about some books. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jason, or as much of the internet knows me as Easy Cat. Today we are going to be, I really did just wake up from a nap. I don't even know what's going on. Where am I? How did I get here? That's how I feel pretty much every time I wake up. Focus, listen, get it together. I always said pay attention. Focus. You're very distracting. I don't know who told you to wear that today, but it's very distracting. Okay, what are we doing? Oh, right. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in June. This is going to be my June wrap-up, discussing each of the books that I read this past month, what I thought of them, and in accordance with the bylaws of my Project Shelf Control project, I'm going to be telling you if I'm planning to keep or unhaul those books, and then I'll kind of give you a sneak peek of what we're doing in July, because I have some very exciting, I'm going to be reading 2 very exciting series in July, and I can't wait to get started. A couple of quick announcements before we get started. If you enjoy these videos, and why wouldn't you? I'm clearly a mess. Make sure to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you back here in the future. As I mentioned before, I do have a free to join book club on Fable, a free to join anime club on Fable, a free to join Discord. I'll put the links to all of those down below. I also have a subscriber community on Bindery called Easy Cat Press. There I post exclusive content, but more importantly, we are publishing books together. We have House of Frank by Kay Sinclair, which is coming out October 15th of this year. And then we have Of Monsters and Mainframes by Barbara Truelove, which will be out in spring of 2025. And in July, we are doing Pitch Fest number 3, which means I'm going to be looking for the 3rd book that I'm going to be publishing under the Easy Cat Press imprint, which is crazy. I'm not ready. I am ready, but I'm not. I have gotten so lucky with the first 2 books that I'm publishing. I love both of them so much. I'm nervous about finding a 3rd book that I love that much, but I have hope that it is out there, and I just have to find it. I'll put the links to all of those things down below so that you can check them out for yourself. All right, that's enough nonsense. No more nonsense. I'm cutting us off. We can have no more nonsense today, okay? Because now we're going to get into the book reviews. I'm going to show you the books that I read in June, and this is no nonsense time. It's a very serious thing we're doing here. Who am I kidding? You signed up for the nonsense. It's why you're here. How was your June, by the way? Are you having a nice time? It's very hot out here in Orlando. It's like 100 degrees today. How's the weather where you live? Have you done anything fun this summer? Have you seen a pool? Not have you gotten into the pool, have you seen one? Like, even have you driven by one? We live in an apartment. I guess we do have a pool, so I have seen it, but I haven't gotten into it. I just wave at it as we walk by it. What are we talking about? What's going on? Let's talk about the first book. Is that okay with you? Let's get started. Before we jump into all the books that I've been reading from my bookshelf, I figured we'd start with the one book that I read this month that was not from my bookshelf, which is the book that I read for Easy Cat's book club, my book club this month, which was Icarus. Okay, so this is, I guess it's kind of a retelling of the story of Icarus, but I don't know the story of Icarus really, so take that with a grain of salt. But it's about this young man. His name is Icarus. This is a young adult queer novel, and it's about this young man named Icarus, and he works for his dad, and his dad is basically a criminal. His dad has been robbing their neighbor of famous works of art. He has his son steal them in the middle of the night, and then he recreates them, like creates a forgery of them, and then has his son put the forgery back in the house in this rich person's collection. Okay? And so one night Icarus is there poking around looking for something, and he gets interrupted by another young man named Helios. And it turns out that Helios is the son of the man who owns all this art. And it turns out the man who owns all the art is actually a pretty terrible person and has been really mistreating his son. And then, of course, you know, Helios is like, no, I know it's super dangerous to come back, but you should come back and hang out with me because I'm so lonely. And, you know, they're 2 boys, and they both think each other's hot. So they're like, yeah, sure, I should definitely put my life in danger to come hang out with you in the middle of the night in your house where I've been stealing things from. So, you know, they form a relationship. And we also really deal with Icarus, because Icarus is basically being a criminal for his father, who is a criminal. Icarus has chosen not to get close to anyone in his life. Like, any friends that he has at school are more acquaintances. He keeps them at arm's length. He doesn't allow them to come over. He doesn't allow them to get close to him. And so he's like really, really lonely as a person, even though he has people around him who do like him, who want to spend time with him. He actually is very lonely because he keeps everybody so far away. And that's really the premise. And if I tell you any more, I'm going to explain the entire book to you. So I really liked this. I thought it was beautifully written. It's just absolutely gorgeous. I think it really explores, it explores what it's like to be alone despite having people around you, but it also explores what it's like to find someone who finally cares about you. Icarus, because of how he's grown up and his mom's not around, and his dad really also keeps him at arm's length, he is very averse to people even touching him or hugging him. So a big thing in the story is like at one point, like one character just like barely touches him, and for him that's like a lot. Like, and I kind of get that. I'm someone who has to be very comfortable with people before I'm like really comfortable like being like really physical, or like even like hugging people. Now that I do a lot more kind of in the public eye, I've gotten better at hugging strangers, but that was something that I used to be really not great at. Like when people would approach me and be like, oh my gosh, are you a hugger? I would say yes, but inside I was like, no, I'm really not. Please don't hug me. Okay, we're doing this. We're doing it. It's happening. Okay, we're hugging. Okay, it's over. Thank God. I've gotten a lot better over the years, and now I actually enjoy hugging people, and I like that. But for a while, that was not the case for me. I was really uncomfortable with hugging people, especially people that I didn't know, and I had to get really like familiar with people before I was comfortable with that. So I really resonated with that aspect of this book. The book, I will say, does deal pretty heavily with child abuse and endangerment, so I want to point that out. If you're going to read it, that is a big aspect of the story and what is going on in these kids' lives, and they don't gloss over that. They definitely like really, hone in on that. They also hone in on the fact that these systems that are in place to protect kids are actually kind of terrible. Like Icarus tries to go to like police and people to like help him with Helios' situation, and they're like, we'll put you on the schedule for like a month from now, and he's like, what? He's in danger now. And it really, kind of points that spotlight at these systems that actually like, because of like bureaucracy and paperwork and all that, they actually aren't super helpful to the people that need the help right this moment. So I thought that was really interesting. There's just like a lot of really beautiful moments in this book. If you've liked things like Aristotle and Dante, or even Heartstopper, or I think this has, I know this is going to be like sacrilegious to say, but Heartstopper, I love Heartstopper, but Heartstopper is like a very light, fluffy book, and it does deal with some more intense things and some more serious topics, but at its core, Heartstopper is still a very like light, positive, fluffy book. This has like some much darker moments, and it really delves into some really dark things that these kids are going through, so just be aware of that. But I guess the thing I'd probably compare it the most to would be like Aristotle and Dante, Discover the Secrets of the Universe, because it has a lot of almost like philosophy built into the conversations they have of talking about, because they are two people who are named after these Greek characters, and that actually comes into play. Like the story of Icarus and Helios and these Greek characters does exist in their world, and the reason that they are named after them actually is relevant to that story because of how their parents named them. So that actually does come into play, which is really interesting. But there's a lot of like deeper meanings, and it's one of those books where like the lightest of touches, the stolen looks, like it has a lot of those elements to it. It's a really beautiful book. The writing is really elegant and really lovely, and it is incredibly heart-wrenching. It is a book that I mean, it was like a roller coaster ride of emotions reading this, but I do think it was really powerful, and I think the topics it touches on and the things that it discusses, it does so in a really nuanced, really powerful way, while still making this a story about two people finding, two very lonely people finding each other and providing a support system for each other when they themselves don't really even know what a support system looks like. And I think that was just really, really beautiful. This is one of my favorite books that we've read for my book club this month. I don't say that as like a subtle brag. When I pick books for my book club, I pick books that I have not read yet because I want to read it for the first time with my club. And that means that some are winners and some are not. That's just how it is, right? Like when you pick books that you don't know if you're going to love or not, you go into them, and some you love and some you don't. But this was probably one of my favorites that we've read this year for my book club. I just really resonated with it a lot, and I really liked it a lot. And I think the writing was just absolutely beautiful. So I liked this. Icarus was great. And if I had to choose right now, which I guess I will keep this because I thought it was great, and I would actually like to reread this at some point. Okay, now we can get into bookshelf stuff and things that I read this month for my bookshelf. It's funny, it's interesting. I feel like I actually am going to tell you many books I actually chose that I'm going to be unhauling this month. So after this video, I'm going to be putting them up on my Pango shop to sell, but we'll go through them one at a time. So the first one is Leech. Now, if you saw my video about this, I'm going to try and explain this book, but it's a hard book to explain. So just like grab your emotional support bread. I don't even know where mine is. I feel like it's in here somewhere. My office where I film is such an absolute catastrophe disaster right now. Like I could trip and fall walking to the door. It would be a whole incident. I think the emotional support bread is in here somewhere. I can feel its aura in the room with me, but I don't know exactly where it is. So Leech was recommended to me about over a year ago by someone because I had said that I really liked Gideon the Ninth. And this definitely has like Gideon the Ninth vibes in that there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of what is going on until you realize what's going on. And then you're like, whoa. The story starts out with this doctor. They are going to this like chateau. And this is kind of like in a post-apocalyptic world, like post-apocalyptic, like European type world. And they go to this chateau. Does it take place in Europe? Oh gosh, now I can't remember. I'm going to say it does, but I could be wrong. Okay, so just bear with me. They go to the chateau and the previous doctor has died. And so they are there to research why the previous doctor died and also take over for the previous doctor. Well, it turns out that all the doctors in this world come from a place called the Institute. And all of them are people who have basically been infected with this leech-like parasite. And so they now all exist in this like hive mind parasite. So the doctor that is going to research the doctor's death used to be the doctor who died, but can't remember how they died. And also gets little glimpses into other versions of themselves throughout the world. And when they get there, they find out that the doctor has this like black oozy stuff coming out of their eyes. And they realize that it is like a competing virus that they are now competing with. It's like a competing parasite, basically. It's like competition for them. And so they are now like navigating this almost like creepy chateau in this creepy land and trying to figure out where this virus thing came from, but also make sure that they themselves don't contract it because then it might kill them. It's wild. It's kind of science fiction-y, but it's also like gothic horror. It's like science fiction gothic horror. There's definitely some aspects of like Frankenstein in here, of that kind of a story of like, you know, night with the like the lightning coming from the sky and things coming up from the dead that shouldn't. And there's a lot of creepy factor to this, but it's just such a unique story, and all of the concepts are so interesting. And there's like there are moments that I was just completely creeped out. It's not like a jump scare type book, but it is the type of book that'll make you feel like scratchy and like creepy crawly. This is also very similar to Gideon the Ninth, where there's a lot of times things will happen and you don't know if they're real or if they're things that are happening in the character's head because they're possibly infected and they're now seeing things or imagining things. And so you're constantly like trying to navigate like what's real and what's not and what is happening right now, but also what is happening in other parts of the world where this doctor is like getting information from, because they're constantly getting like these little hints of information from their other selves throughout the world. And so you're kind of trying to navigate like what is happening here and now for real and what is not happening at all and what is happening but somewhere else, and we're just like getting a glimpse of it in this moment while we're doing something else in this moment. It's a lot. It's a lot. I will say this is a book that I forget the name of it, but like I buddy read with an audiobook. So what I mean by that is I listened to the audiobook while I was reading the text. And I don't necessarily think you would have to do that to really follow along. I do think it helped a lot, but I will say I didn't love the audiobook narrator. I had a lot of issues with the audiobook narrator and how she did some of the accents. Some of the accents she did were like I just could not understand what she was saying at all. So I had to then have the book in front of me to like really be able to grasp all of it. But all that to say, I did end up loving this. I thought it was so unique and so cool and so creepy and such a wild story. I mean, the fact that when I try to explain it even now, I feel like I sound like an insane person tells me that the book is like really special. Like the fact that trying to explain it makes me sound like I myself am losing my mind makes me think, oh, this book is like kind of cool. I really like this a lot. I love Gideon the Ninth. So anything that's kind of in that same wheelhouse. Now, I will say I do like Gideon the Ninth more. There is that. I think that's mostly because I love Gideon, and even more so than that, I love Harrow the Ninth. So if you've heard me talk about the Locked Tomb trilogy so far, but it will eventually be a Locked Tomb Koala because there will be 4 books. My favorite book in that series so far is Harrow the Ninth, and I love Harrow. I love her character so insanely much, and I love that book. I still love those books more than this, but this is kind of in that same realm, but it's different enough that it's worth owning both, because they are still telling very different stories, but they're telling them in kind of similar ways, and I like the way that they're telling their stories, if that makes sense. So this was Leech. If you're looking for something bendy and creepy and kind of like if you're okay with being a little lost, this is the same thing I say when I recommend Gideon the Ninth. You have to go into it knowing that you're going to be a little lost for most of the book. You're going to be lost until you're not. And then when you're not, you're going to be it's going to be worth it that you were lost for so long because the payoff is really good. That is what I would say for Gideon. That's what I will say for this. You have to be okay with being a little lost in the story and not really being sure what's real and what's not for a good chunk of the story. And if that is not for you, if you're like, I need to know what's going on at all times, I don't want to be confused, I don't want to wonder what's happening, I just want a straightforward story, then Leech is not for you. But if you like things that make you question reality, Leech is very good. I liked it a lot. Next up, I read Our Missing Hearts by Celeste. I mostly picked this up because I picked this up a while ago because I really enjoyed Celeste's other works. And I will say that this was my least favorite Celeste that I have ever read. So this takes place in a very slight future, okay? And we follow a young man who his mom has essentially left their family, so he's living with his dad. And we come to find out that at some point America passed this act that basically put the blame of all the things that were happening in the US with this depression and all of these things on China. And so they were basically seeing anything that was anti-American, or especially that felt like pro-Asia or pro-China, as being anti-American. And so that they were rounding people up, and they were criminalizing people who were not just Chinese, but really just any Asian descent, basically using China as a scapegoat for all of America's problems, and in order to basically come out of this depression, because, many countries, especially America, really like to put the blame on someone, and then that takes the blame off of us. And, you see in the story how that law that's passed ends up creating a lot of residual issues, and also a lot of residual racism throughout the country. And anybody that tries to speak up or protest or anything is quickly silenced. And this little boy is trying to find his mom. So the first half of the book is him trying to figure out what happened to his mom, and then the second half of the book is sort of the backstory of what happened to his mom. And then by the time all of that is done, there's really not much left. The book doesn't really go much further than that. I mean, it does a little bit, but nothing is really resolved at all in the book, which I guess is kind of the point. It kind of leaves it up to what do you think will happen? I had a lot of issues with this book. I think there are some really good ideas here, but I think let me list them. Let's go down the line. So first and foremost, obviously this book has a very strong message, but I think the messaging of this book is almost too on the nose. It's so on the nose that there's no room. There's very little nuance in this story. It's very blunt and upfront, and this is the issue, and this is what we're talking about, and it almost feels like you're being lectured to at times. It is definitely a story that prioritizes messaging over actual storytelling. Now, I know a lot of people feel differently about this. There are people who are I don't want any politics in my fiction, which is wild because they'll say that about something like Star Wars, which is so political to begin with, but then they'll be I want things like Star Wars that aren't political. And you're have you seen Star Wars? Do you know what Star Wars is about? But I digress. There are people who don't want any political messaging in their fiction. And then there are people who I like a story that takes things from our world and issues in our world and puts them into fiction in really interesting ways, because I think in reading things in that way can sometimes put a light on things or help us see things from another point of view. And I think that's a really powerful thing that fiction can do. So I like that. But at a point, I think if you prioritize messaging over story too much, your messaging is loud and clear, but your story ends up falling flat. And that is very much what I feel like happens in Our Missing Hearts. The messaging is strong and clear. This is where we're heading. It's not a good thing. It's going to cause these problems. But then the story there's just not much to it. All the characters are so one-dimensional. There's just not much to anything that's happening on the page. I will say this is a very short book. It's a very fast read, but it felt endless. It just felt so long because so little is actually happening on the page, because it's all about the messaging, what the book is trying to convey to you. The other problem with portraying these aspects of American life and where we're going is it tries to portray this future that we're heading towards, right? But this book came out in, I want to say 2021 or 2022, and we are already there. This book almost, even though this book only came out 1 or 2 years ago, it already feels almost dated, which is a wild feeling that you're reading this and you're wow, this book is concerned about these fascist things happening, and we are already in the midst of these fascist things happening. So it no longer feels like this cautionary tale of the future. It feels like this story of the present that honestly doesn't go hard enough. Like, it doesn't portray the absolutely terrifying things that are happening in our world enough. It almost feels like a softer, kinder version in some ways, not in every way, in some ways of what is happening right now, when it is itself trying to be a cautionary tale of what could happen should things get really bad. So it just is a weird feeling. It's a weird feeling to read something that's like, if we don't watch out, this is the future we have, when actually we are currently living in a situation that is fairly similar to what this book is trying to get us to watch out for, except... And that, I think, would be okay if this book came out 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. I would be okay with that because it's like, oh, well, we're here. But this book came out so recently, it's just a reminder of how quickly things are devolving into this really horrifying place. And ultimately, I think for a story to be so recent and to then kind of have, this book has so much to say, it has so much of a message, and in the end I feel like it doesn't actually say anything. Like, I feel like it fails to actually make the point that it's trying, that it's beating you over the head with this point the entire book, and yet I somehow feel like it actually doesn't make the point, which is so frustrating. I got to the end of this book and I just felt so frustrated because I feel like there's so much potential to the story that is here. And at every twist and turn, I feel like the potential was never reached. And that is really frustrating, unfortunately. And I don't know why that is or how that happened, but this ended up being a really big miss for me. So this will be an unhaul. I did not enjoy this book very much. And the more I think about it, it's definitely one of those books that the more time I'm away from it, the more I think about it, the more issues I find with it, which is never a good thing. I love a book where you read it and you step away, and the longer you're away from it, the more things you find that you loved about it. I always talk about that with The Starless Sea. When I first finished that book, I thought, oh, it's all right. And then the more I thought about that book, the more I ended up loving it, to the point that now it's like one of my favorite books ever. This book is the opposite. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, no. So Our Missing Hearts was a miss for me. I did not love it. I'd love to know what you thought about it if you've read it. I've talked to some people since I posted my review of this that felt very similarly to me. I've talked to some people that actually really liked the book. So I'm curious, what was your feelings on the book? But this is going to be an unhaul for me. Next up, we have two series, one that is a trilogy and one that is a duology to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. This is a 3-book middle grade series, City of Ghosts, followed by Tunnel of Bones, followed by Bridge of Souls, okay? These are the story of a young woman named Cassidy Blake who can see ghosts. One day, she is riding her bike and she falls into some frozen water, and she is saved by a ghost, and now their lives are like twisted up in each other, and so she can see him, and the funny part is that her parents are actually ghost hunters, but they can't see the ghost, only she can. So the story kind of starts with her parents finding out that they have gotten a TV show deal. So they are going to be with her and her ghost, and they're going to be, and their cat, are going to be traveling the world to different haunted places and making a TV show out of it. Now, I felt like I was going to love this because I love ghost hunting shows. I love ghost hunting everything. Like, we've talked about this, I think. Ghost hunting is like one of my guilty pleasures. I just love it. I love haunted places. I love like ghost stories. I love like ghost files and ghost hunters, and I love all of that stuff. So I was like, oh, a story about ghost hunters, sign me up. But I did not love this. I think there's a couple things. So I think this is a perfectly serviceable middle grade story. I just don't think to me, the writing was a little too on the simple side. I've talked about this in I feel like in my past 16 videos. I have specific things that I look for in stories to be like, yes, this was a good middle grade book for me as an adult, as opposed to this is a good middle grade book for middle graders. And I think this would be a perfectly serviceable middle grade trilogy for middle graders, especially ones that like kind of spooky things. There are a couple things. So the one is that the story is like horribly predictable, like painfully predictable. But that being said, the moment that we are building towards in book 3, which you know from book 1 we're building towards, ends up being such a letdown, such a dud. Like it ends up getting to this point where you could like drive it home and have this really epic, beautiful moment to end the trilogy. And it ends up just going like, no, never mind. Like they get to that point where you can have that moment, that really beautiful, like end this story and this moment, like this really bittersweet moment. And they literally just like turn around and go, no, we're not going to do that. And I guess maybe that's done because it's for younger people. Maybe that was the decision there. Maybe the ending I wanted would be a little too dark. I don't think it would be. I've read some dark stuff for middle graders and for young adults, and I think middle graders and young adults can handle that stuff if done correctly. But this story just chose not to go there. It intentionally chooses not to nail the ending, and that kind of drives me crazy. My biggest issue with these books, though, comes in the form of the main character is a huge fan of Harry Potter, okay? Obviously, we can talk for days about J.K. Rowling and the effect that she is having on the world, but I'm willing to give these books a little bit of a pass because of when they were written versus when they were published. It's kind of in that nebulous gray area where we weren't quite aware of the J.K. Rowling factor just yet. So the main character references Harry Potter constantly. Like, that is like her frame of reference for everything. Oh my goodness, that castle looks like Hogwarts. Oh my goodness, that ghost reminds me of a Dementor. And here's the thing. Even if first of all, it's just really annoying because of the J.K. Rowling factor, but let's just for a second, for the sake of argument, take that factor out of the story. I would still say that the constant referencing of another book to describe things in this world is incredibly distracting at best and feels like lazy writing at worst. And I want to preemptively say, V. Schwab is my favorite author, okay? I love V.E. Schwab's work. You've heard me rave about V.E. Schwab's work. And so I know that V.E. Schwab is a good writer. So to see V.E. Schwab, Victoria Schwab, her middle grade moniker, constantly rely on describing things not with descriptive language, but just with like, oh, it reminded me of the Hogwarts Express, is honestly infuriating. Because like, I know she knows how to describe things with absolutely stunning, beautiful language, and this constant use of Harry Potter as a way to describe the world that Cassidy Blake is seeing. I need to make sure that her name is Cassidy Blake. I just, for a second, was worried that I was saying the wrong character's name because Cassidy Blake is such a, like, comic book character name that I was like, am I referencing a comic book character? No, it is Cassidy Blake. What were we talking about? I got distracted. I had a little ADHD moment just now. Did you see that? We caught it live on camera. The fact that she is constantly relying, regardless of whether it's Harry Potter or not, if you are constantly relying on using another piece of culture or another book or another fandom thing to describe your world, it starts to feel not only repetitive, but just like annoying. Like, I'm like, just describe the castle to me. Describe the train to me. Describe the ghost to me. Don't tell me it's like this thing from Harry Potter. It also, I feel like would be, I know like a lot of people have read Harry Potter, but I also think that would be alienating to people who have never read those books because they're like, I don't know what that looks like, right? I know it's like a big piece of fan pop culture, but still, I feel like these books could have been so much better if those many things were just described. I will say the Harry Potter references get less and less in every book, and I'm sure they ended up starting to pull them back when things with J.K. Rowling started to get insane. The first book especially is like constant. At one point I felt like it was on every single page that Harry Potter was being referenced in some way, and it drove me nuts. These are very easy reads. I read them in 3 days. I read one book per day, 3 days. And I will definitely be unhauling these. I really did not enjoy them. I do think there's a middle grader out there who will love these and will really enjoy them and enjoy them for the spookiness that they are. I've talked to some other adults that really enjoy them, but there was just too many things that constantly I felt like were taking me out of the story. And I've talked about like third acts. The most important part of a story for me, the thing that solidifies whether I love it or not, it will always be the third act. That's just who I am as a person. You can have the best setup, the best character development, you can have all of these things, but if you don't nail the ending, I just feel like it all falls apart. Like, the ending of a story is so important to me as a reader. And other people might feel differently, but like, story endings are so important to me. And I also think how you write, I feel like endings also display the craft of an author better than almost anything else in a book. I think the things that really help you tell the craft of, like, the true craft of writing of an author are the first page and the ending of the story. Like, those two things really tell me a lot about the actual craft of the story that I'm reading. And the fact that this ending just felt so underwhelming when the perfect ending was right there. It was right there. You could reach out and touch it. And they were just like, no, we're not. Nope, no thank you. It was really upsetting. And then all the Harry Potter references. It was too much. So, City of Ghosts, these are going to be an unhaul for me, but I'm sure they will find a lovely home with someone who likes them more than I did. What I love about V.E. Schwab, I mentioned this in my TikTok review of these, is that every single one of her books and series are completely different. And what I love about that is that there are people that are going to read one of her books and love it, and then they might read another one of her books and not love it, or vice versa. They might read something from her and be like, this is not for me, but then read something else by her and be like, oh my God, I love this. Like, I love that everything she writes is so wildly different from not only just in tone, but in character, in story, in world. Like, that is something that I love about her, is that when I pick up one of her books, I never know what to expect. So of course, there was going to come a day where I read a V.E. Schwab book and didn't love it. And that is totally okay, because I still love her other series so much. It's okay. It's okay to have one that we don't see eye to eye on. That's okay, because all of her other work makes me so happy. And I think the fact that I know I love her other work so much probably didn't help the case for these books, because the whole time, like I said earlier, I was like, you're better than this. All right, next up we have a duology. Wow. Okay, so the first book was called Seven Devils, and the second book is called Seven Mercies. I just held that trilogy up the whole time, and it was a lot on my arm, so I'm gonna go one book at a time here. This duology follows a group of women on this like intergalactic space adventure, which I would say is like kind of they're in sort of a rebellion against an empire. I know, wild and original. We're following two of them, who would then eventually meet three more, and then we add on a couple other people at the end of the story till we get to seven, as they are trying to basically like take down this empire. I would say this story is sort of a feminist mix of Star Wars and Mad Max Fury Road. Okay? And I think that's a pretty good combination. When I read the first book, my thoughts were that I thought I love the characters, okay? I loved the characters, especially the five that we really deep dove into. There are two characters in this book that are introduced very late, and we get very little information about them. And so the fact that they were like added on to make seven, I was like kind of eye-rolly about in this book, but we'll get back to them in a second, okay? So the five characters that we get to know in this book, one of them is like a former like queen of, or like former princess of the empire that she's now fighting against. One of them is is a mechanic. One of them helped so all the people in the empire have these chips implanted that has the AI that the empire is controlling, that's helping to like control the populace. So one of them helped to design that AI. One of them has this she was like a courtesan type character, and she has the power to like manipulate people's feelings. One of them is used to be a soldier for the empire. Okay, so those are like the five main characters in this book. I love the characters. I sometimes get a little hesitant when books have like a lot of main characters and we're jumping back and forth between the different characters, because ultimately you're going to have characters that their stories are not as interesting as others, and the whole time you're like, oh my God, can we get back to the interesting character? I also feel like sometimes when you have a lot of characters, it's easy to get confused. Wait, who is this? What did they do? Who's this person? All of that. I didn't have that feeling at all in this book. Like, every single character I was super interested in. Every single character I wanted to know more about their story. This book uses flashbacks really effectively to tell the different stories of these different women. The story itself, this first book has a lot of pacing issues. Like, this first book is pretty slow. For a book that is kind of touting itself as this fast-paced sci-fi adventure, it's a very slow-paced book. There is a lot of just standing around and talking. And there's a lot of pacing issues in this first book. Like, there are times where it moves really quickly, and then there are long stretches where it feels like nothing is happening, and it starts to kind of wear on you a little bit. I also do think this is one of those sci-fi stories, so if you like hard science fiction with a lot of rules and a lot of like space terminology and space technicalities and things like that, this is one of those sci-fi books that if you think about it a little too long, things start to fall apart. Much like Star Wars, to be honest. Like, I love Star Wars, but if you start to think about any aspect of Star Wars a little too much, there's like no science in that universe. It's all just fantasy in space, all right? And this is a little more on the sci-fi side for sure, but like, it definitely has elements where like, if you think about it a little too long, you're like, that doesn't make sense. No. So just, you have to try not to think about it, okay? When I finished this book, I liked the characters enough, and the fact that it was only a 2-book duology, of course it was only two, the fact that it was only 2 books long as a series, it's only a 2-book duology. Obviously it's only a 2-book duology, Jason, that's how long duologies are, you dum-dum. Calm down, I hear you insulting me, and I I internalized that, and I'm gonna do better, okay? I decided to give the second book a try. I was like, I might as well see this through because it's only one more book. And I am so glad I did, because Seven Mercies is phenomenal. It is so good. So first of all, the pacing is so much better. This book moves like it is a constant clip. We continue to learn more about the 5 characters that we met and really got to know in the first book, and then it really fleshes out those other 2 characters that kind of got thrown in on the end, to the point where they both ended up being characters I just absolutely adored. Like, I ended up so loving them with the information and the backstories that we got about them. Like, it took 2 characters that I felt were just so shoehorned into this book and made them characters that I just absolutely adored. This book has a really beautiful tale to tell of these women, like, really going up against all odds. I compared this book to, especially the second half of this book reminds me a lot of the ending of like any Mass Effect game, where they're all going into this impossible mission. There's no way that they can all survive, but you desperately want them all to survive. So every little moment, there are a lot of fake outs where you're like, oh no, this is it. That character's not going to make it. Oh, okay, they made it. Okay, and but now these characters are in danger. Oh, no. Oh, okay, they're okay. Like, there's a lot of that happening back and forth. And like the whole time you're just like holding on for dear life, hoping that they all make it through this insane scenario that they're being put through, and that they also achieve their goal of changing this system of oppression that is in place. I will also be fair, this book has my favorite trope, which is the found family trope. Like, I love found family. It is my favorite thing in books, and the fact that this book does such a good job of bringing these women together that are so different, that when they first meet, don't get along at all, and end up being just like, they end up being so important and to each other. Like, they end up being each other's family in this universe of awful, is just so incredible. And I loved that. The book also has tons of representation. There's a sapphic relationship. There is a trans character. There is a bi character there. And there's lots of like racial diversity as well. There's just so many different intersectional diversity. Oh, there's disabled rep in the book. And that is addressed quite heavily, which I thought was really cool. Like, there's just so much to this story. There's so much here. I would recommend this series, just knowing that the first book is a little slow and has some pacing issues. It has some world building issues, but it's almost worth it so you can get to Seven Mercies, which is such an incredible thrill ride of a book full of just every single one of these 7 characters is so interesting, and many of them are deeply flawed. If you don't like books where characters make mistakes, or if you don't like books where characters do things that are hurtful to other characters that are in that found family and then have to figure out how to rectify that and correct those mistakes, then you might not like these. Like, sometimes I read reviews of like YA books. I think these are technically adult books, but they definitely read like older YA, so just keep that in mind. I sometimes read reviews of YA books where people are like, no, this character made this one mistake and it's unforgivable and I don't like it. And I really like books where the characters are very kind of messy and make mistakes, because it makes them feel very human to me. I like very messy, imperfect characters who make a lot of mistakes and then have to like learn from those mistakes. And these 2 books really, really show that a lot. They show characters messing up, sometimes in really big bad ways, and then seeing how they have to course correct and do better going forward, and how they make these situations that they've unintentionally or intentionally created, how they correct them and how we grow from our mistakes. Like, I love seeing that in stories and seeing characters learn and grow and take what they've take the things they've done in their past and become better people for them. And this series really does that a lot. And like I said, this second book is just such a thrill ride of a book, but it's also filled with so many incredible character moments. And I loved these 7 characters so there was not a single one amongst them that I was like, I could have done without that one. I loved all 7 of them by the end. They were all fantastic. And my only negative of this duology at this point, I mean, yes, the first book is a little wonky, but my real negative is that it's only a duology. I wish there was more to this world, because I really loved it and I would love to spend more time with these characters. So the Seven Devils duology will be a keep for me. I loved these. They were so fun. And that brings us to our last book, which is Star Daughter. I just finished this last night. I'm so sorry. It's kind of hard to see. I have the Alcrate edition, so it has these like sprayed edges. I do believe it's signed. It's a signed copy. Wow, so beautiful, right? So this is the story. I haven't seen Disney's Wish, that movie, but I assume this is what that movie is about. This is about a young woman named Shveta, who is basically half a star. So her mom was a star, her dad was mortal, and she is approaching her 17th birthday, and things start to get crazy. She has all this power, and she ends up, because she has this like emotional outburst, ends up like causing her dad to go into like, he has like a heart attack, goes into like a coma. And so now she is going to the heavens with her best friend to try and get her star family to help her save her dad. She goes up there, but then there's like all these like the stars have all these politics, right? And they're like, well, we can help you, but first you have to help us, and we need you to win this competition for us so that we can like get our way in the star political system. That's a very simplified version of what's going on in this book. I thought this was pretty fun. This is a standalone. I don't know if it was meant to be a standalone. It reads like a standalone, but it does have some little moments at the end where I feel like there could have been more books if they decided to, but I don't know that this book did well enough to have a sequel or not, but it does, you can absolutely read this as a standalone. It reminds me a lot of like Percy Jackson type books, like, or even like Rick Riordan Presents type books. Like, we're seeing a lot of this like Indian mythological world, and we're getting a lot of like folktales and things from Indian mythology, and I thought that was really, really cool. I think this story does a really good job of portraying the main character, Shveta, is not a queer character, okay? But I really resonated with her as she's trying so hard to please and do right and protect her parents and be the person they want her to be, when that is not the person she is inside. But she's trying to do it to protect them and take care of them, when really it should be the other way around. It should be them taking care of her. And I really resonated with that. Like, I felt, I felt very seen by that. And even though she is not a queer character, her best friend is, but there's a lot here for anyone who has ever felt different or out of place and has had to deal with that from a family perspective. I feel like this book really, really captured that really well. While she's at this, in with the stars and their whole thing, she has to deal with, there's like I said, a lot of politics are going on, and there are other families involved in this competition, and some of them are trying to, basically like knock other people out of the competition. The competition ends up, this is not like a normal competition book, by the way. There isn't like 3 different trials. There's really only like one final performance trial that is towards the end of the book that decides the winner. So like you're kind of building up to this competition the entire book, and then it ends up being like 1 or 2 chapters like towards the end of the book. So I will say some things that I think are maybe not the best about this book are, I think the pacing is a little wonky. I think the early part of the book feels real fast, and then there's a big chunk in the middle where it does feel really slow, and it's very explorative. We're exploring what goes on in the world of the stars, and we're exploring how stars and humans interact from a point of view of like inspiration, and how stars inspire people, which I found to be very interesting, probably one of the most interesting parts of the book, because that's kind of how the magic system works, is like stars are able to inspire mortals, but mortals can also become like addicted to star inspiration. So that was really interesting. But there's this big chunk of the book which is just kind of her exploring her heritage and her family and this other world, but there's not actually like a lot happening. It's mostly just like her and her feelings and walking around this like star world feeling things. Like that's basically what she's doing. And to that point, like the competition, which I really liked the competition aspect, but it's so short and it's over like that. But I did find it to be really interesting. When we finally got to that competition part, I was like, oh, this is really cool. I wish there was more of it, because it ended up being like really creative and a very different kind of competition. There's also a boy. She has a boy that she likes, but then she finds out that he actually knew that she was a star, and he was initially, when he first started dating her, he was getting close to her because I think it was his brother was a star / mortal who was going to be in this competition. So he initially got close to her to learn more about her, but then he felt for her. But then by the time she learned that he was doing this, it was already too late. And he already had feelings for her, but then she was upset that he lied to her. Yeah, there's a lot of teen drama, okay? There's a lot of teen drama. Maybe its biggest crime, which isn't even a crime, is that it doesn't necessarily stand out amongst a lot of other books of its type. But that being said, when I think about books like this, I think about things like Hotel Magnifique or Caraval, things kind of in that same realm of like step into a magical world. And I liked this more than any of those. I also think this book has the added bonus of having that Indian representation. Like, to me, that made this book stand out because it wasn't like your run-of-the-mill, like, Greek gods or, you know, the normal things we see in fantasy books. It was nice to see a different magic system and a different world and some different world building. And I really liked Sheetal, the main character, a lot. She is dealing with, like, a lot of, like, really terrible relatives that are being, like, really awful to her. But she has, like, her best friend is awesome. Her best friend is so wonderful. And I love that her best friend is in the story because then at least she's not all alone in this. Like, she has a support system, which I think is really cool. And I even thought the boy that she likes, I thought he was a pretty great character too, right? Ultimately, I kind of almost wish this story had more. Like, I wish it was a duology or a trilogy because I just feel like this world could have been expanded even more, which I thought would have been really cool. I liked the overall concepts of this being a story about like a half star, half mortal, and what that means. And you know, it also has that trope of like child abandonment, like she's abandoned by her mom, so she's like trying to figure out why her mom abandoned her. And also, you know, her dad's just trying to do his best. And so there's a lot of family aspects to this. I thought this was good. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I am thinking I may unhaul it, and not because I didn't like it, just because, you know, I have this special edition. I feel like there's probably someone out here who absolutely loves this book, and I would love to get that into their hands. Because for me, it was like a good book, but I don't know that I would ever pick it up again. But like, it was a good book. I had a lot of fun with it. I've read a lot of like, you know, kind of run-of-the-mill YA fantasy. And like I said, I liked this more than about 80% of a lot of the YA fantasy that I've read, because a lot of them feel very kind of been there, done that. Like, I've read so much YA fantasy at this point that a lot of them start to bleed into each other, and it's like they all kind of are trying to do the same thing. They're all telling very similar stories with similar tropes. Not all. I shouldn't say all, because there are definitely exceptions, right? But there is a lot of like, oh, it's this trope again. Oh, it's this trope again. And at a certain point, that starts to wear on me. I'm just like, oh, I want something different. And this book still uses a lot of those tropes, and it still uses a lot of those kind of same conventions. But the fact that the mythology and the world were so different really made it stand out for me. And I think that was really cool because it's just great to see more representation in the fantasy YA space. I love that. I want more of that. I'm always looking for more of that. So that was really nice. But I think I'm actually going to think about this one for maybe like a day. I think this is going to be an unhaul for me, but simply because I think I would love to get this copy into the hands of someone who absolutely loved this book. I thought it was really good, and I would recommend it. Yeah, maybe I'll get this into the hands of someone else that will like it just as much as me, if not more. So that was Star Daughter, and that was my last read of the month, and I thought it was pretty good. And I'm sweating. That is everything. I feel like this was such a workout. I'm sweating. It's hot. I'm clammy. It's also 100 degrees outside, and I'm sitting by a window, so that's probably not helping anything. Ooh, I need a fan. Now I'm choking. I'm dying in front of you on camera. This is about to be a very eventful video. I need water. Where's my assistant? I don't have an assistant. I just pointed at a giant teddy bear. Nothing happened. I was not given water. This is not that kind of production. We don't have assistants, okay? I'm looking at a slightly tilted phone and talking to you right now. That's all this is. Thank you so much for joining me. I would love to know what you read in June. Did you read anything good in June? Have you read any of the books that I discussed today, and what were your thoughts on them? And what are you planning to read in July? So speaking of July, I am going to be reading this month for the very first time Aragon. That is the next thing on my bookshelf. So I am going to actually wind around on my bookshelf and hit the yellow section where I have my first Aragon books. I only have the first one right now, but I actually have 2 copies of Aragon. I have a paperback version, which is in my yellow section, and then I also have a hardback version, which someone sent to me. So I'm actually going to read the hardback version, even though it's a different color than where we are at on the shelf. Just go with it. I'm going to be reading Aragon for the first time, and then hopefully after that, my plan is to read Realmbreaker, that trilogy by Victoria Aveyard, for the first time. So that's what I have planned for July. The first week of July, I'm going to be this coming week, I'm going to be at Dice Tower East, which is a local board game convention, for 5 days. So I'm not going to be doing a lot of reading for the first week of July. So I will be happy to get through those 2 series for July. That's kind of my plan for July, is to try and read the books of Aragon and then to read Realmbreaker. Those are all pretty chunky books. So if I get through all of those, I'll be happy. And then I have my Book of the Month Club for Fable. So we'll see if I get through all of those. I'm kind of losing an entire week of reading this week, so it might not happen. I'm going to do my best. But that is the plan for July, and I'm really excited about it. So all of that being said, July, I might not do, I don't know if I'll do this same kind of like monthly wrap up. I probably still will, but I'm also planning to do like single videos about each Aragon book to cover those and to cover my feelings, because I feel like I'm going to have a lot to say about each one. So rather than do like a whole, like, I want to like do single videos to discuss each of those, because I feel like there's probably going to be enough to say. So you can look forward to those in July, and I think that will be a lot of fun. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll put links to everything down below if you want to check me out on the other places on the internet. And as always, the way we end all of these, most importantly, happy reading.